It started as a plan to disconnect for the weekend. No phone, no work, no city noise, just a little solitude and fresh air. I'd been running myself into the ground between long hours at work and a generally overloaded life. The idea of heading into the woods by myself wasn't anything new. I'd done it a few times before, and those trips had always gone fine. Peaceful, even. This time felt the same at first. I chose a campsite about 2.5 hours north. A basic site with no amenities, just a cleared patch of land tucked between a few thick-trunked pines and a small lake with still, dark water. I parked my truck along the gravel trail, shouldered my pack, and set out. The first hour was fine. The trail was narrow but marked well enough, and the air had that damp, forest floor smell I'd always liked. No people, no cars, just the occasional crack of branches in the wind and the chirp of birds somewhere high up. I had checked the weather. It would be cold at night, maybe around 35 degrees Fahrenheit, but I'd packed layers and a decent sleeping bag. By the time I reached the spot I planned to set up, it was late afternoon. I pitched my tent, gathered a few downed branches for firewood, and boiled some water for a meal. Everything felt routine. I sat beside the small fire as the sun dropped below the tree-line, watching the flames flicker against the bark. It got quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the sort that almost hums in your ears. Still, I tried to shake off the unease and went about getting ready for the night. I didn't sleep great that first night. The cold I expected, but it was more the scattered noises outside that kept me half awake. There were small sounds, twigs snapping, something rustling near the brush, probably raccoons or deer. At one point, something brushed against the tent wall. Just a little push from the outside, but I froze up all the same. I waited, held my breath. Nothing else happened, and I figured it was just the wind or maybe a rabbit. Morning came gray and quiet. I got up early, ate a protein bar, and walked around the lake trail. The path was soft and uneven, muddy in some spots. I passed a few old footprints going both directions, but nothing recent. It gave me some comfort knowing someone had been through recently, though that comfort didn't last. By midday, the weather turned. Clouds moved in fast, and the air got heavy. It didn't rain, but it felt like it might. I spent the afternoon making sure the firewood was dry and that the tent seams were tight. It was while I was doing that I noticed something weird. About 50 feet from the site, deeper in the woods, there was a spot where the ground looked disturbed, like something had been digging. The soil was loose, pushed up in odd piles. I walked over and crouched down. No tools, just claw marks. Maybe a bear digging for roots or a den. I backed away slowly. I knew better than to stick around fresh signs like that. But I also wasn't sure if packing up and walking out in the near dark was smarter. I decided I'd stay but keep my knife close and sleep light. That night was worse. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of something large moving close by. It wasn't crashing through the trees, but it wasn't small either. I sat up inside my sleeping bag and listened. It walked past my tent. I could hear its steps crunch the layer of pine needles. It circled once, twice, then silence. I sat there for what felt like an hour, knife in hand, staring at the shape of the tent walls. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe heavy. Eventually it left, or at least I couldn't hear it anymore. I must have dozed off near dawn because I opened my eyes to weak daylight and stiff legs. Outside, the site looked undisturbed. No trash, no tracks that I could see in the pine needles. But I found something that made my stomach drop. One of the long branches I'd stacked near the fire pit was broken in half, clean and sharp. Not chewed like by an animal, but snapped like someone had stepped on it. Hard. I packed quickly. My plan to stay 2 more nights got tossed. I didn't cook, didn't eat. Just broke down the tent, stuffed everything into the pack, and started walking. The trail back was longer than it should have been. Every small sound made me stop and scan the woods. Every squirrel dash or bird wing made my pulse jump. An hour in, I found prints, bare, I think. Large ones, fresh, heading the same way I was going. That made it worse. I moved slower, careful not to startle anything. At one point, I heard breathing, not mine, just off the path. Low, raspy, steady. I didn't turn. I didn't look. I walked straight, slow, trying not to tense up or run. Whatever it was, it followed me for about a quarter mile. Always off to the side, never closer, never farther. Then it was gone. No noise, no warning. It just stopped. That was almost worse. When I reached my truck, it was still early morning. The sky was flat and pale, the kind of light that doesn't warm anything. I threw my pack in the back and got inside. Didn't even take off my boots. I started the engine and sat there for a moment, doors locked, eyes scanning the tree-line. I didn't see anything, but I could feel something. Not eyes exactly, just a pressure. Like the woods were telling me not to come back. Not angry, just done with me. I drove the whole way back without turning on the radio. Didn't stop for gas. Didn't stop at all. I told myself it was just an animal. Just bad timing. Nothing happened, technically, but there's a difference between being in nature and being watched by it. I haven't gone back since. Haven't even hiked the local trails. I still have all my gear, but it sits in the garage, covered in dust. I've had people tell me I should go again, try a different area, pick an easier trail, but they didn't feel what I felt out there. It wasn't fear of being attacked. It was fear of being known. Known by something that doesn't want to be seen, something that watches from the trees and waits. That's not something I need to feel again. So now, when I get the itch to get outside, I step into the backyard. I sit on the porch. I listen to the wind in the trees overhead. And I let that be enough. Because whatever lives deeper out there, it's better off left alone. And I am too. I don't know why I picked that trail. It was one I hadn't done before. I usually stick to the marked loops, the ones with plenty of foot traffic, mostly because I hike alone. But that day I felt like getting away from everything. Work had been hell. I hadn't slept right in days. My apartment felt like it was closing in on me. I didn't want to see people, didn't want to hear traffic. I just wanted quiet, deep forest, and my own thoughts. The trail was somewhere out near the edge of a state park about 2 hours from where I live. I found it mentioned in some old hikers forum thread with a GPS pin and a few grainy photos. No official map, just a narrow dirt pull-off off a remote mountain road. A tiny wooden sign with faded letters and a barely visible path cutting between the trees. It looked like no one had used it in months. That made it perfect. I got there around 9 in the morning, parked my car in the dirt next to a line of pine trees, and loaded up my pack. Just the basics: water bladder, snacks, a knife, first aid, compass, whistle, small flashlight, and a rolled-up lightweight jacket. The forecast was clear. I had about 6 hours of daylight to work with. The first part of the hike was steep, with switchbacks weaving up the side of a ridge. The dirt was dry, the pine needles slippery in spots, but I was used to it. I stopped a few times to catch my breath and take in the view. Low valleys below me, the sprawl of forest covering everything like a thick green blanket. No houses, no roads, just forest and wind and birds. Felt good. I hadn't felt that kind of quiet in a long time. After maybe an hour or so, the trail leveled off. It narrowed into a thin strip of packed earth that weaved through thick undergrowth and broken tree trunks. There were spots where fallen trees forced me to duck or detour. It was clear the trail hadn't been maintained in years. But I liked that. I liked the feeling of going somewhere forgotten. It made me feel like I was the only person on Earth for a while. I walked for another hour and a half, maybe 2. The sun was overhead, cutting shafts of light through the branches. I hadn't seen or heard anyone else the whole time. I paused now and then to drink water, eat a granola bar, or just rest my legs. Everything felt normal. Nothing strange. Just the forest doing what the forest does. Then, somewhere around mile 6, something changed. I had stopped in a narrow clearing to take a break. There was a fallen log there, so I sat down and pulled off my pack. I was reaching for my water when I felt it. This weird, prickly sensation down my neck and shoulders, like static in the air, or like I just remembered something really important too late. My ears felt sharp. I noticed the forest had gone quiet. No birdsong, no leaves rustling, no insects. Just stillness. I froze. I didn't move. Just sat there, holding my water bottle, scanning the trees without turning my head. I don't know why I knew something was off, but I did. My body knew before my brain did. Then I saw it. Maybe 20 or 25 yards to my left, in the brush behind some fallen branches, there was movement, slow and low. At first, I thought it was a dog, but dogs don't move like that. It was smooth, deliberate. I stared hard, squinting into the shadows. Then it stepped forward just a little, enough for a shaft of sunlight to catch its side. It was a mountain lion. I'd never seen one in person before, not even in a zoo. I've read about them. I know they're out there, especially in remote forests like this, but actually seeing one so close was like staring at something that shouldn't be real. It looked huge, bigger than I expected. Its fur was golden brown and perfectly smooth, like velvet over muscle. Its tail moved slowly behind it, curling and uncurling. Its face was still half hidden in shadow, but I could see the curve of its shoulder, the shape of its head, and I could feel its eyes on me. My heart felt like it was punching holes through my chest. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I barely breathed. I could feel sweat pouring down the back of my neck, even though the air was cool. My legs were stiff. My mouth was dry. It wasn't crouched. It wasn't baring its teeth. It wasn't making noise. It just stood there watching me. I tried to remember everything I'd ever read. Don't run. Don't make sudden movements. Don't turn your back. Don't crouch or look small. Make yourself big. Make noise. But none of those thoughts translated into actions. I couldn't move. I was too scared. I just sat there, gripping my water bottle, staring back at it like we were locked in some kind of test. I don't know how long we sat like that. Could have been 30 seconds. Could have been 5 minutes. My mind was screaming at me, telling me to do something. Stand up, yell, throw something, but I didn't. I just sat there, stiff as stone, breathing through my nose, trying not to cry or puke or pass out. At one point, I realized I had pissed myself, just a little, just enough to feel the wet warmth spread under me. I didn't even feel it happen. My body just did it, I guess. Fight or flight, and I wasn't doing either. The mountain lion took one slow step forward, just one. Not fast, not aggressive, but its eyes were locked on me, and I thought that was it. I thought it was going to pounce. I felt my fingers go numb. I braced, but then it stopped. It turned its head a little, like it was listening for something in the distance. Its ears twitched. Then, slowly, it lowered its head and stepped back into the brush. I didn't move. I kept staring. I listened. I waited for it to reappear, but it didn't. The forest was still quiet. No birds, no wind. Just silence. I waited another full minute, then another. I slowly stood up, legs shaking, knees locked. I turned in every direction, eyes darting, heart hammering, mouth dry as sand. No sign of it, no movement, no sound. I put on my pack and started walking. Not fast, not running, just steady. I scanning every shadow, every tree, every root. I walked like that for maybe a mile, maybe more. I don't even remember how far. I was too focused on moving, too focused on not making noise. Every gust of wind felt like breath on my neck. Every snapping branch in the distance made me flinch. I kept imagining it behind me, watching me, following me. Eventually, I started hearing birds again. Little chirps, insects buzzing, leaves rustling, the normal forest sounds. And that felt worse somehow, like the forest had exhaled and gone back to normal, but I hadn't. I was still stuck in that moment. When I finally saw the trailhead again, and the edge of my car through the trees, I almost cried. I practically ran the last 100 feet. When I got to the car, I threw open the door, tossed my pack in the back, and sat down hard in the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine right away, just sat there, shaking, trying to catch my breath. My pants were still damp. My shirt was soaked with sweat. I looked in the rearview mirror and barely recognized myself. I drove home without the radio on. Just silence. Just my thoughts. I kept checking the mirrors. I kept seeing flashes of movement out of the corner of my eye. I didn't relax until I was back in my apartment, sitting on my couch, holding a glass of water with both hands like I was afraid I'd drop it. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape, that golden body in the trees, that stare. I know it wasn't aggressive. I know it was probably just curious, maybe even young, but it was still a mountain lion, still a predator, and it was still 25 yards from me. If it had wanted to, it could have ended me right there. I wouldn't have even had time to scream. I think what scared me most wasn't the danger. It was how calm it seemed. Like I didn't matter. Like I was just another part of the forest. Something to look at, consider, and then forget. It made me feel small. It made me feel weak. And I guess in the grand scheme of things, I still hike, but I stay on the main trails now. I don't go off the map. I don't go hours deep without telling anyone. I don't try to be alone in the wild anymore. That trail, I never went back. I doubt I ever will. I still think about that moment all the time. That stillness, that stare, that silent understanding between two creatures. One curious, one terrified, and I'll never forget it. I don't hike for fun anymore. That used to be my thing back before this happened. I used to love it, putting miles behind me, climbing higher, letting the silence of the woods swallow up whatever noise I carried with me. No phones, no emails, no city buzz. Just the crunch of dirt underfoot, the smell of pine, and the long quiet stretch between trail markers. This happened in the Bitterroots in early fall. I don't know what made me pick that trail. It wasn't even one of my usual loops. I'd driven up the night before and slept in the back of my truck. Woke up with the morning light, made some instant coffee over my little camp stove, and laced up my boots. Weather was good, crisp air, leaves just starting to turn. My pack was light. A few snacks, a bottle of water, a knife, first aid kit, and some rain gear just in case. The trail was a loop that ran just under 10 miles, starting low through old-growth forest and then gaining a few hundred feet as it curved along the ridge. The place was empty. I'd signed in at the trailhead register and there were no names above mine. No cars in the lot either. Just me and the woods. About 3 miles in, the forest started to get denser. The air was cooler in there, a little damp, and I started seeing old signs of life. Half-rotted stumps clawed by bears, little bones in the underbrush, and here and there some scuffed dirt or animal tracks. Nothing alarming, just regular signs you see out in real wilderness. I passed a fresh pile of deer scat, saw a rabbit dart off under a log, watched a hawk circle overhead. All normal stuff. The trail narrowed as it rose. At around mile 5, I stopped for a break. There was this overlook where the trees broke open and you could see down into the valley. I sat on a flat rock, pulled out a granola bar, and took a few sips from my bottle. I remember feeling good, like really good. My legs were warm from the climb, the view was incredible, and it was dead quiet. Not a single sound, no wind, no birds, no bugs even. Just stillness. And that's when I noticed it. I don't know what caught my attention first. Maybe it was instinct, maybe just the wrong kind of silence. But I got that feeling, like I was being watched. It's a real thing, not just some creepy story idea. It's a cold, tight feeling, right in the middle of your chest, like your heart knows something before your brain can catch up. I stood up and turned slowly. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees, layers and layers of green and brown. And then there it was. It was maybe 30 feet away, a mountain lion, full-grown, huge shoulders, long tail flicking one side to side. It wasn't crouched or anything, just standing still between two trees, head low, watching me. Those eyes golden, dead still, like it had been watching me for a while already. Now here's the thing. I've read a little about mountain lions. I knew just enough to know that if you see one, it's probably not planning to attack. If it was, you wouldn't even know it was there. You wouldn't have time to scream. They go for the back of the neck, fast and silent. So seeing it should have been a good sign. But it didn't feel like a good sign. My mouth went dry. My first thought was to back away. But I remembered you're not supposed to run. Running triggers the chase instinct. So I just stood there, heart pounding, and tried to make myself look big. I raised my arms a little, didn't yell, just breathed slow and heavy and tried not to piss myself. The cat didn't move. It just stared. Not in an aggressive way, not even tense, just watching. Curious, maybe, like it was trying to figure out what I was. I don't know how long we stood like that. Felt like forever. My knees were locked, muscles screaming to move. Every second felt like a minute. At some point, I realized I was shaking. My legs, my hands, even my jaw. The fear didn't come in one wave. It crept in slow, like water rising in a glass. And I just kept thinking, if this thing decides to try me, I'm dead. There's nothing I can do. I remember every little detail. The way the light shifted on its fur. The faint wind through the trees starting up again. A leaf falling and landing silently on the ground between us. And the cat, still frozen, still watching me. Then, just like that, it blinked, turned its head slightly, and started walking. Not fast. Not even like it was scared. Just bored. Like it had seen enough and didn't care anymore. It padded off into the trees without a sound, the way big cats do, and vanished between the trunks like smoke. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, trying to listen, trying to make sure it wasn't circling around. I turned slowly in a full circle, every muscle in my body wound tight. I couldn't see anything now, just trees again. Same forest as before, only now it felt different, like something had been peeled back. Eventually, I made myself move. Step by slow step, I backed away from that overlook and started down the trail. I didn't run. I wanted to. God, I wanted to, but I didn't. I walked fast, checking over my shoulder every few seconds, scanning the woods constantly. I didn't take breaks. I didn't eat or drink. My whole body was on edge. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. I thought it was back. I kept replaying it in my head. Its eyes, the stillness of it, how close it had been, how easily it could have ended me. When I finally made it back to the trailhead, the sun was low. My legs were rubber. My shirt was soaked in sweat. I signed out of the trail register with a shaky hand and climbed into my truck. I sat there for a long time before I even started it. Just stared at the steering wheel, trying to come back down. On the way home, I kept the windows up, music off, just silence. I didn't tell anyone right away, didn't post about it, didn't brag. It didn't feel like something to brag about. It felt like something I'd barely survived. A week later, I gave away half my gear. Sleeping bag, tent, stove. Just boxed it up and dropped it off at Goodwill. I kept the boots though. Can't explain why. Maybe as a reminder. I've gone on a few hikes since, but not like before. Short ones. Places with other people around. I carry bear spray now. Sometimes a hiking stick. I don't listen to music or podcasts while I walk. Keep my head up, eyes moving. But honestly, something changed that day. The woods used to feel like home. Now they feel like borrowed space. Space that belongs to something else. Something that let me leave once, but might not the next time. That feeling of being watched, of knowing you're not the top of the food chain out there. It never really leaves you after that. You start seeing the trees differently. You start understanding what it means to be prey. And even now, sometimes when I close my eyes, I see those gold eyes again, staring through the trees, waiting, watching, just watching. I never used to think much about mountain lions. I knew they were out there. I'd seen signs on trailheads, warnings about sightings, instructions to make yourself look big if you ever came face to face with one. But they always felt like someone else's problem. Like bears, like rattlesnakes. Something you read about or hear from someone else, but never really expect to run into. At least not in the way I did. It happened in the early fall somewhere in Northern California. I don't want to name the trail, partly because I've never gone back and partly because I'd rather not plant the idea in someone else's head. But it wasn't some remote, rugged route deep in wilderness. It was one of those longer but well-maintained trails that you take if you wanted to do a solo overnight or a long day hike to get away from people for a bit without completely losing signal. That morning had started off normal. I'd packed light, just the basics, water, a couple snacks, a first aid kit, a knife, and my old external frame backpack that I'd had since college. I remember it was cool but not cold. That crisp, clean kind of air that always hits you in late September. Leaves hadn't fully changed yet, but you could tell it was close. The plan was to hike about 8 miles out to a small ridge that overlooked a dry riverbed. I'd been there once before, but that time I turned back early because the weather started looking bad. This time I wanted to finish the whole loop. I remember feeling excited, even calm. It was just one of those days where the rhythm of walking feels good and steady. Like your boots and the trail are in sync and there's nothing else in your head except the sound of your own breathing and the way the trees look when the light hits them through the canopy. About 5 or 6 miles in, I stopped for a short break at a spot where the trail splits. One way goes downhill into thicker woods, where it gets darker even in the daytime. The other leads up and eventually arcs toward that ridge I was headed for. I leaned against a tree, took a drink, stretched my legs a bit. Everything felt fine. Still hadn't seen a single person since I left the car. When I got moving again, I took the uphill route. That part of the trail starts to get narrower, like it's less traveled. You could tell people mostly used the lower route, probably because it's easier and circles back to the parking area quicker. I pushed on, though. I remember passing these big, flat rocks covered in moss and seeing a squirrel that just stared at me and didn't move until I got real close. There was this stillness in the air, too. No wind. No birds, which I thought was a little odd but not strange enough to stop walking. After another mile or so, the trail dipped slightly before climbing again toward the ridge. That dip is where everything happened. I just rounded a bend where the dirt path cuts sharply between 2 large boulders, and as I stepped out into the open again, I saw it, maybe 15 or 20 feet ahead of me. The mountain lion. It was crouched low in some dry grass near the tree line on the right side of the trail, its back to me, maybe at a slight angle. I couldn't see its face, but I could see its body tense, focused on something in front of it. That's when I saw the deer. A young one, smaller than average, just standing there maybe 10 feet from the lion, completely unaware. The lion was frozen in that low, wide-legged pose, like every part of it was spring-loaded. I stopped moving instantly, didn't breathe, didn't even shift my weight. I remember thinking that maybe if I was quiet enough, it wouldn't notice me. Maybe I could back away slowly. But before I could even think through the rest of that plan, it moved. Not at the deer. Turned toward me. The whole thing happened in less than a second. One moment it was focused on the deer, the next its head whipped around and its body spun with it. And then it ran. But here's the part that shook me more than anything else that day. It didn't make a sound. Not a snap of a twig. Not a thud of paws on the ground. Nothing. It was like watching something move in a soundproof room, or like someone muted a video right as the action started. The only thing I heard was my own breath catching in my throat. It bolted off into the trees with this terrifying smoothness, like liquid muscle. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. And that silence, it messed with my head. I expected rustling, branches cracking, leaves shifting. But all I got was silence and the sight of its body slipping through the woods like smoke. I stood there frozen, too afraid to move forward or backward. The deer had vanished too, either spooked by me or the mountain lion. I didn't even see which direction it went. My legs felt locked, like my body hadn't caught up to what my eyes had just seen. I stayed like that for what felt like 5 minutes but was probably closer to 30 seconds. My brain kept running over the same thought. If it hadn't turned around, if I'd come around that bend just a few seconds later, I wouldn't have even known it was there. Could have gone for the deer or it could have gone for me. Eventually, I backed away slowly, then turned and walked fast, too fast, down the trail the way I came. I didn't run, but my pace was just short of it. I kept glancing over my shoulder, listening for movement, anything, but there was still nothing. Not a bird, not a breeze, just that weird silence hanging in the trees like a weight. I must have walked 2 full miles before I let myself stop again. I found a spot where the sun broke through the trees, sat on a rock, and just let myself breathe. My heart was still racing. My shirt was soaked with sweat, not just from exertion, but from the sheer dump of adrenaline that had hit me when I saw that thing turn. And still, the part that got to me wasn't that I'd seen a mountain lion. It wasn't that I'd gotten in the way of a hunt. It was how it moved, how it ran in complete silence, like nature had hit mute for a moment, just long enough to let me know how easy it would have been for it to get to me without a sound. I hiked the rest of the way out with a rock in one hand and my knife in the other. It was stupid. I knew neither would help much if something really wanted to take me out, but it made me feel a little better, like I had some control even if I didn't. I didn't tell anyone about it right away. I think it took me a few days just to process what had happened. When I finally did talk about it, people seemed more impressed than anything. "That's so lucky," they'd say. "You actually saw one?" Or, "Good thing it didn't attack you." And yeah, they were right. It was lucky, but it didn't feel lucky. It felt like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. Like I'd crossed a line between being a harmless visitor and becoming part of a different kind of food chain. I wasn't scared in the moment. I didn't even have time to be. But later, when I thought about how quiet it was, how easily it could have made a different choice, that's when the fear settled in. Slow, steady, permanent. I've hiked since then, but not alone. Not out that far. I stick to well-traveled trails now, the kind where you can usually see someone else up ahead or hear a dog barking in the distance. I still love the woods, but that day changed something for me. There's a part of me now that's always listening, always looking, not just at what's in front of me, but at the corners of the path, the places where the light doesn't reach, the spots where you can't quite tell what's hiding in the brush. I don't need to see another mountain lion to know it's there. I've already seen enough to understand how close they get without making a sound, how real that silence is, and how fast everything can change when it's broken. I never thought a can of beans would be the center of the worst hike of my life. It started like most of my solo trips do. An early drive up into the mountains with everything I needed in my pack, just enough fuel in the tank, and not a real plan in my head other than to be out for 2 nights. The area I picked was a little patch of state forest that's not officially a park, so it doesn't get a lot of traffic. You won't find it in any top 10 lists, and it's not marked clearly on maps. Just a tangle of trails, logging roads, and clearings that hunters and old-timers know about, but not many others. I'd been up there once before and remembered it as quiet and good for solitude. I figured I'd just follow the same trail from last time, veer off toward a stream I remembered crossing, and pitch camp there. No cell signal, no cars, no other hikers. Just trees, birds, the sound of my boots on dirt. That's what I wanted. I parked just off a gravel road and started hiking mid-morning. It was early October. Cool, damp air, fallen leaves crunching underfoot, but not quite cold enough to need more than a flannel and a base layer. The forest was thick but not hard to navigate. I knew I had a few hours of daylight, so I didn't push too hard. The first part of the trail went smoothly. The old markers were still there. Red paint on trees, faded but visible, and I passed a few landmarks I remembered. A tall stump shaped like a chair, a huge stone with initials carved into it, a crooked birch that looked like it had been struck by lightning. Around late afternoon, I found the stream. It wasn't anything special, just a shallow, clear ribbon of water winding between rocks, but it felt like the right spot. I set up camp on a flat patch near a big pine, gathered some dry branches, and got a small fire going. Everything felt normal, peaceful even. I cooked a little rice, had some jerky, watched the flames dance for a while, and settled into my sleeping bag just after dark. I didn't even bother putting the rainfly on the tent. Sky was clear, and I liked falling asleep under the stars. That night, I heard something in the woods. Not close, just faint crunching sounds off in the distance. I figured it was deer, maybe raccoons. I'm used to that. Animals moving through at night, sometimes stopping to sniff around. I wasn't too bothered. I stayed still, listened for a while, and drifted off again. The next morning was cloudy. It had that look like rain might come later, so I decided not to stay another night like I'd planned. Instead, I figured I'd do a big loop, maybe circle around a different way and head back to the car by evening. I ate a light breakfast, packed up, and started off. A couple of hours in, I got off trail. I didn't mean to, I just missed a turn or maybe followed the wrong tree marker. The forest in that section was denser, with thicker underbrush, and the markers were either gone or hidden under bark. I pulled out my compass and tried to orient myself, figuring I'd cross the stream again eventually and be able to follow it back toward the trail. That's when I found it. At first I thought it was just some abandoned campsite, some gear left behind, maybe by a hunter or a hiker who never came back. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a proper site. There was no tent, no sleeping bag, no signs of someone trying to make a real shelter. Just a small fire pit, now cold and gray, and a few items scattered around it. A rusted camping stove, a chipped enamel mug, and an old tin of beans. That tin caught my eye. It looked like one of those cheap store brand ones from decades ago. Dented, dirty, but unopened. Someone had scratched words into the side of it. Not carved with a knife or anything sharp, more like scraped on with a rock or key. The letters were crooked, hard to read at first, but once I wiped the dirt away, it was clear enough. These are the beans of a killer. I stood there holding it, trying to figure out what the hell that was supposed to mean. My first thought was that it was a joke. Something edgy or weird done by someone with a dark sense of humor. Maybe it was just a can someone found and marked for fun, then left behind. But the longer I stood there, the less it felt funny. The site didn't look right. It wasn't just abandoned, it was forgotten, overgrown. Whatever had happened there hadn't been recent. The ashes in the pit were washed out, like they'd been rained on many times. The gear was old, too. I checked the expiration date on the beans. 1997. That gave me pause. Why would a can that old be sitting out here like that? Why would someone bring it and leave it behind? And more than that, what kind of person writes something like that on a can and leaves it in the middle of nowhere? I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. No sounds, no wind. Just that deep, steady quiet you get in the woods when it feels like the forest itself is waiting. I didn't like it. I thought about leaving right then and there, just dropping the can and getting the hell out. But I didn't. I put the can in my pack. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought I'd look it up later, figure out if it was connected to something. Maybe I just didn't want to leave it there. Either way, I kept it. The rest of the day was off. I kept thinking about the can, replaying that phrase in my head. These are the beans of a killer. It sounded like something someone would write if they wanted to be remembered, or blamed, or maybe just feared. Late that afternoon, I finally found my way back to the trail. I was a few miles from the car, and the weather had started to turn, wind picking up, clouds thicker. I hurried, pushing through that last stretch harder than I normally would. I felt watched. I know how that sounds, but I did. Every time I glanced behind me, I expected to see someone. Nothing ever appeared, but the feeling didn't go away. I made it back to the car right before the rain hit. The first drops landed on the windshield as I slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking when I started the engine. I didn't sleep that night. I left the can of beans in the trunk, and I lay awake in bed thinking about it. In the morning, I pulled it out, took pictures of it, then started doing some searching. First, nothing. Then I came across a string of old forum posts, hiking boards, missing persons threads, that kind of thing. There was a mention of a man who'd gone missing in those woods back in the late 90s. Solo backpacker, mid-30s. His car had been found on the gravel road. No trace of him ever showed up. A few vague reports of people seeing someone who matched his description years later, but nothing ever confirmed. Just theories, wild speculation. One user claimed he had a photo of an old campsite deep in that same forest, found during a hunt in the early 2000s. In the photo, barely visible, was a rusted tin of beans on a rock. I kept digging, found one obscure article in a back issue of a local newspaper. A hiker had been found dead in the same forest in 2006. Blunt force trauma. No suspect ever found. The article mentioned that the victim's camp had been disturbed, and some gear was missing, including food. Authorities at the time didn't rule out foul play, but no arrests were made. The article said the only item left untouched in the fire pit was a can of beans. Police found it placed upright, cleaned off, but unopened. The label had been scratched off. I didn't go to the police. What would I say? Hey, I found an old can of beans with some creepy writing on it, and now I think maybe it was left by someone who's killed at least once? It wouldn't go anywhere. Instead, I buried it. I drove out to the edge of town, dug a hole in a shallow patch of woods, and buried the thing a foot down. I didn't want it in my car. I didn't want it in my house. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I packed the dirt tight and left. I've gone hiking since then, but not out there. Never again out there. Sometimes I still wonder if what I found was real, if the writing was a prank, or if I let my head turn a weird discovery into something worse than it was. But then I think about the silence at that site, how the air felt heavier there, how no animals were around, how no part of that place felt like it wanted anyone coming back. And more than anything else, I remember the handwriting. Not shaky, not messy. The words were carved slow and careful, like whoever wrote it wanted to make sure it stayed readable for a long time. These are the beans of a killer. Sometimes I think that Ken was meant to be found, and sometimes I think I found it too soon, or maybe too late. I've always liked walking the woods behind my town. They're not part of any state park or designated trail system, just acres of old forest stretching behind the housing developments and scattered farmland that make up most of this area. People around here call it the Ridge because the land rises just enough to give you some views if you go far enough in. I guess some folks used to hunt there back in the day, but not so much anymore. You'd think with how close it is to town, there'd be more foot traffic, but there's never been. Most people I talk to don't even know the trails are back there, or they know and just avoid them. I'm not sure why. Maybe they just don't care for being out in the woods alone. But I do. I like the quiet. I like being out there when the sun's just coming up. I'll take off around midnight sometimes, after I'm done with everything for the day. I put on a headlamp and bring a thermos of coffee, maybe a granola bar or two, and I just start walking. There's a trailhead a few blocks from where I live, though you have to climb over a fallen fence to get to it now. From there, it winds about a mile into the woods before splitting off into other overgrown paths that don't really go anywhere in particular. Sometimes I'll bring a compass and see if I can find new paths or mark old ones. Sometimes I'll follow deer trails. I've never gotten lost, and I know that patch of woods better than any place else. It was in early October when I saw the shanty town. I remember the night clearly. The air had that kind of weight to it that comes before real cold sets in, heavy and still almost warm but not quite. I'd been walking for about an hour, maybe more. I wasn't trying to get anywhere specific. I was just letting my legs move while my mind drifted. I didn't even have music in my ears that night. Just the sound of the leaves underfoot and the occasional crack of a branch far off in the dark. Around 2 in the morning, I crested this little rise where the trail split. Usually, I take the right fork because it leads to an overlook, but something made me go left that time. I can't say why, just felt like a change. The left trail dips down into a shallow hollow, which then flattens out and gets real quiet. It's always been like that, almost like the sound disappears down there. The trees are packed tighter and there's thick undergrowth, and even in daylight, the place stays dim. I walked maybe 50 yards in and then stopped. I thought I saw something through the trees off to my right, just a glimmer of movement. It looked like light, flickering low to the ground. I shut off my headlamp and crouched a little, squinting through the branches. That's when I noticed the fire. It was small, low to the ground, and steady, not wild or spreading, just burning like someone had built it on purpose. I figured maybe someone else had wandered in here and set up camp, though it'd be a weird spot to do that. No water nearby, no flat ground, nothing but trees and scrub. I pushed through the brush to get a better look. The fire was maybe 40 feet off the trail. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a fire. It was a whole setup. There were shelters, dozens of them, little makeshift huts made from scrap wood, old metal signs, broken tent poles, tarps, even bed sheets strung over low-hanging branches. Some were big enough to crawl into. Others were just lean-tos. One had a table made out of cinder blocks and plywood with an old cooking pot on it. Another had an upturned shopping cart filled with what looked like clothes and trash bags. And in the middle of it all, a fire pit made out of a rusted car tire. Flames were licking up just high enough to give everything around it that soft orange glow. But there was no one there. I stood still for a long time just looking around, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices, not even a cough, just the quiet pop of the fire and the rustle of wind in the trees. The place looked like it could have held a dozen people, easy, maybe more if they didn't mind being close. But every hovel was empty. Some had sleeping bags half rolled out. One had a radio with a wire sticking up like an antenna. Another had a backpack leaning against the entrance. The zippers were open, and I could see a toothbrush and a deck of cards inside. Everything looked used. Not abandoned, not wrecked, used. Like whoever lived there had just stepped out for a second. But there was no trail out, no sign of where they'd gone. I kept my light off and walked slow. I didn't want to spook anyone, just in case someone was still around. I checked a few of the shanties, peeking inside. They all had little bits of life in them. Empty cans, worn-out boots, folded jackets, even a photo in one of them, tucked into the wall with a pushpin. I looked at it for a long time. It was a woman holding a baby. The picture was faded, edges curling up, but not ruined. I started to feel weird then, not scared exactly, but wrong, like I shouldn't be there, like I was trespassing on something private. I stepped back from the shelters and circled wide around the fire. I didn't want to touch anything. I didn't even want to leave footprints in the packed dirt. I was just trying to take it all in. It wasn't just the fact that it was empty. It was how quiet it was. The whole place felt paused, like someone hit a button and froze time, and I was the only one still moving. I crouched down and looked at the fire. It was fresh. The wood was still solid, not crumbling, and there was no smell of long-burnt ashes. Someone had built it within the last few hours, maybe less. I stayed there for maybe 15 minutes just watching, waiting. Then I heard something, a long, slow cracking sound, like a stick being stepped on. It came from deeper in the woods, beyond the far edge of the camp. I stood up straight and looked that way. Nothing, just darkness. I held my breath, listening. Another crack, then another. I turned and left. I didn't run, but I didn't waste time either. I walked fast, kept to the trail, didn't look back. When I got back to the fork, I took the right path this time and climbed up to the overlook. I stayed there until dawn, sipping cold coffee and watching the sun come up over the trees. My legs were stiff and my hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. Felt strange to talk about, like maybe I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see, but it kept nagging at me. So a few days later, I went back. It was late afternoon this time, still light out. I followed the same trail, same hollow, same spot. Nothing. The camp was gone. Every shelter, every tarp, every scrap of fabric or trash, gone. The fire pit was still there, but cold and black. The tire burned through and collapsed in on itself. The ground was scuffed up in places, but not as much as I expected. It didn't look like a dozen people had packed up and left. It looked like the whole thing had never really been there. I walked the perimeter, checked the brush. No signs, no footprints, no wool tracks or paths out. I even circled back and looked in a wider area in case I'd somehow gotten turned around. Still nothing. I went back 3 more times over the next couple of weeks. Same thing, just quiet woods. No signs of life. No sign that anyone had ever camped there. Eventually, I stopped going that way. I still hike, still go out late, still watch the sunrise from the ridge when I get the urge. But I don't take the left fork anymore. I don't go near that hollow, and I haven't seen anything like that since. But I think about it sometimes, about the fire still burning and the shelters so carefully built, about the photo in the wall and the toothbrush in the open bag. I wonder what happened to the people who lived there. I wonder why they left in the middle of the night. I wonder why they left everything behind. And most of all, I wonder if they ever came back. Because if they did, I never saw them. And if they didn't, where did they go?